Nobody tells you that the mind you've been building might be a cage. Not a fortress, a cage. Because from the inside, they feel identical. The person who can't be shaken, can't be reached. They look like the strongest person in any room, and maybe they believe it too. Maybe they've spent years constructing this version of themselves with real discipline, real sacrifice, real intention. But here's the question that almost nobody thinks to ask. What if the thing you built to protect yourself is the same thing preventing you from ever actually living? That's not a philosophical provocation. That's a neurobiological fact. And by the time this is over, you'll understand exactly where the line is between a mind that's genuinely unbreakable and one that's simply learned to feel nothing. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters more than anything else you'll hear today. Let's get into it. Here's where most people get this completely wrong. They assume that an unbreakable mind is a quiet mind, still, unreactive, a system that doesn't respond to pressure because it's somehow above it. And so they build toward that, training themselves to suppress reactions, flatten effect, project a permanent state of unbothered indifference. They're optimizing for the wrong variable. Real psychological resilience isn't the absence of a stress response. It's the speed and efficiency of recovery from one. The brain doesn't become unbreakable by feeling nothing. It becomes unbreakable by processing everything and returning to baseline faster than an unregulated system ever could. The technical term for this is allostasis, the body's capacity to maintain stability not through rigidity, but through continuous, flexible adaptation to changing conditions. The resilient system bends, absorbs, recalibrates. The brittle system, the one built on suppression and performative calm, holds its shape until the pressure exceeds what it can hold. And then it doesn't just bend, it fractures. So the entire architecture most people are constructing when they try to build an unbreakable version of themselves is actually working against the biological mechanism that makes a mind genuinely hard to break. That's the first thing nobody tells you. Here's the second. The neurochemistry of real resilience is specific. It has measurable components. It isn't a personality trait or a mindset. It's a biological profile. And it can be understood and to a significant extent cultivated. When acute stress hits, the amygdala fires. Cortisol floods the system. Norepinephrine sharpens focus and prepares the body for response. This is correct. This is the system working as designed. The question isn't whether this happens. It will always happen. The question is what regulates. In a genuinely resilient brain, two specific neuropeptides act as precision buffers against the cascade going too far. The first is neuropeptide Y, produced in the hypothalamus and the amygdala. NPY functions as the brain's internal brake on sympathetic overstimulation. When norepinephrine floods the system under extreme stress, NPY counteracts the excess, lowering arousal, reducing anxiety, preventing the physiological spiral that turns acute stress into chronic damage. Research on elite special operations soldiers, people whose stress exposure is genuinely extreme, consistently shows that higher NPY levels correlate with superior performance, lower rates of dissociation, and faster psychological recovery under conditions that would break most people. The second is DHEA, a steroid hormone synthesized in direct response to stress. DHEA functions as a neurological shield, specifically protecting the hippocampus from the corrosive long-term effects of elevated cortisol. When cortisol remains chronically elevated, it begins to degrade hippocampal tissue, impairing memory consolidation and the brain's capacity to extinguish fear responses. DHEA blunts this process. Studies of individuals with high DHEA to cortisol ratios consistently show lower rates of PTSD, lower dissociation under pressure, and significantly better performance in high-stakes environments. And then there's galanin, a neuropeptide co-released with norepinephrine during sympathetic activation, functioning as an endogenous anxiolytic, a natural buffer built into the system's own stress response, designed to prevent the hyperarousal from becoming its own problem. Here's why this matters for the unbreakable mind conversation. These neurochemical buffers don't activate in a suppressed system. They're part of a stress response, a genuine one, a brain that has been trained to intercept and flatten its own stress signals before they can be felt doesn't build these buffers. It bypasses the mechanism that would develop them. The person performing calm, suppressing every signal before it reaches the surface, isn't building resilience. They're preventing their own nervous system from doing the adaptive work that would make them genuinely hard to break. You cannot develop the buffer by avoiding the signal. The buffer only builds through exposure, response, and recovery. That's the paradox at the center of everything. So where does the performance come from? Because it doesn't appear from nowhere. The template gets installed early, long before anyone has the vocabulary to name what's happening. When a child reaches toward a caregiver for comfort, signals distress, bids for connection, and the adult consistently isn't available emotionally, the developing nervous system draws a conclusion that will shape everything that follows. Not a conscious conclusion, an encoded one, needing people costs more than it returns. So the attachment system, the neural architecture wired to seek safety through proximity, learns to shut itself down. Psychologists call the mechanisms it deploys to do this deactivating strategies. Subconscious processes that intercept attachment bids before they reach awareness, suppress emotional signals before they can be felt, and construct an elaborate self-sufficiency that presents from the outside as independence. From the inside, it feels like strength. It isn't. It's a nervous system in permanent conservation mode, holding everything back because the early environment made it unsafe to release anything. This is where the nonchalance epidemic actually originates. Not on social media, not in dating culture, in a bedroom years earlier where nobody came, and the child made an adaptation that felt like growing up, but was actually just a very sophisticated form of self-abandonment. The culture then finds that person and offers them a language for it, a framework, an aesthetic, the unbothered persona, the lone wolf identity, the I simply don't need anyone posture. These aren't inventions of digital culture. They're translations of something much older into something that can be performed publicly and received as status. And the performance works socially. For a while. The person who never reacts, never reveals, never appears to need anything. They generate a particular kind of social gravity. People circle them trying to get a response. The strategic silence reads as depth. The flatness reads as control. It also destroys every relationship it touches in slow motion. Modern dating has reorganized itself around one unspoken principle. Whoever invests the least retains the most power. Both parties perform indifference simultaneously. Both withhold to avoid appearing attached. The result is paralysis. Connections stall in that formless, indefinite limbo that has its own name now, the failed talking stage. Not because neither person cared, because both did, and the architecture they were operating inside made expressing it feel like a tactical error. The protection executed perfectly, and quietly consumed exactly what it was meant to protect. This is what the sociologists who study cold intimacy are actually documenting. Not a generation that doesn't want connection, but a generation that wants it desperately and has built, collectively, a social environment where pursuing it openly feels too costly to risk. The emotions don't disappear, they become bargaining chips, withheld as leverage. And the longer they're withheld, the less access anyone has to them, including the person doing the withholding. But underneath, the biological cost is accumulating invisibly. Research on avoidant individuals under acute social stress reveals something genuinely unsettling. When measured physiologically, cortisol levels, cardiovascular activation, skin conductance, their bodies register the same stress response as anyone else's, sometimes higher. The system is under full load, but the awareness of that load has been deactivated. The body is keeping the score. The mind has been trained to stop reading the board. Clinicians call this the somatic disconnect, the cognitive somatic split. And what it produces over time isn't composure. It's a cascade. The attachment system closes, severing access to emotional data. Without that data, emotional states can't be accurately identified or differentiated. Without differentiation, distress becomes a vague, formless weight that can't be processed or discharged, which eventually becomes clinical anxiety, chronic depression, and a particular kind of interior emptiness that no external achievement can penetrate. The US Army understood this at scale when they designed the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Program, a systematic resilience intervention rolled out across over 1 million service members. They made a deliberate architectural choice. They didn't build a program around suppression or performance. They built it around reappraisal, active coping, and connection. The core of the program trained soldiers to reframe stressors cognitively before the emotional response escalated, not to prevent the response, but to alter its trajectory at the source, to move from catastrophizing to calibrated assessment, from avoidance to active problem solving, from isolation to selective support seeking. The program showed measurable reductions in catastrophizing, measurable improvements in emotional fitness and coping adaptability, and notably, the effects were most pronounced in the youngest soldiers, the 18 to 24 demographic, suggesting that the brain at that stage is still plastic enough that systematic intervention can genuinely reshape its default stress architecture. What makes this significant isn't just the data, it's what the data implies. If the most stress-exposed institution in the country, an organization that selects for physical and psychological toughness, concluded that genuine resilience requires reappraisal and connection, rather than suppression and isolation, that conclusion should carry weight far beyond a military context. Because they weren't working with people who lacked hardiness. They were working with people who already had it, and they still found that teaching emotional processing made them harder to break. The criticism the program received is also instructive. Clinical researchers pointed out that an overemphasis on positivity and performance could inadvertently reproduce the same dynamic it was trying to solve, encouraging people to perform resilience rather than develop it. The line between reframe the stressor and suppress the distress is narrower than it looks, and a program that pushes people past that line produces exactly what it was designed to prevent, which is the same line that matters in every individual context. Cognitive reappraisal. The real kind, the adaptive kind, doesn't ask you to pretend nothing is happening. It asks you to accurately reassess what is happening before the emotional escalation runs away with the situation. The stressor enters, the system registers it, and then, before the amygdala's initial read becomes the final verdict, the prefrontal cortex intervenes, not to suppress, but to evaluate. Is this as threatening as it initially registered? What are the actual parameters here? What would a calibrated response look like? That intervention, executed early enough, changes the entire downstream trajectory. The emotional intensity doesn't build to the same peak. The physiological activation doesn't spiral. The recovery is faster. And the person on the other end of that process isn't performing calm. They genuinely are calm because the processing actually happened. There's a specific quality to this kind of composure that's different from anything the suppression version can produce. It's present. The person isn't managing a surface. They're actually in the room, actually reading what's happening, actually available for precise response, because none of their cognitive bandwidth is being consumed by performance maintenance. The processing cleared the signal, and what remains is full capacity, directed outward. This is what Ayanokoji represents as a fictional ideal, not absence of internal experience, but processing so complete and so rapid that nothing unresolved remains to interfere with the next move. The fanbase reads his stillness as emptiness. It isn't, it's resolution. The signal came in, moved through, and left nothing behind. That's the actual target. Not the flat effect, the throughput. That's the distinction that cuts through everything. Performance produces the appearance of composure, while the system runs hot underneath. Processing produces actual composure, because the system has genuinely returned to baseline. One of those builds the neurochemical buffers that make the mind durable over time. The other slowly depletes the architecture it's performing on top of. And the final piece, the one the lone wolf mythology is built specifically to circumvent, is connection. The highest levels of documented resilience, across every longitudinal study that's examined this question, are found in people with secure attachment profiles. Not the most isolated, not the most self-contained, the most genuinely connected, because secure connection doesn't just feel good, it's a biological resource. It regulates the nervous system in ways that individual effort cannot fully replicate. It provides external co-regulation when internal resources are depleted. It rebuilds the system after it's been taxed. The person who never allows this, who treats closeness as a liability, who has deactivated their attachment system so thoroughly that connection feels like exposure rather than safety, is running on reserves that cannot be replenished in isolation. Real hardiness isn't built in isolation. It's built through engagement. with pressure, with emotion, with other people, and through the capacity to return from all of it intact. Not untouched, intact. Those are completely different destinations. Untouched means nothing reached you. Intact means everything reached you and you held anyway. One of those is a wall, the other is a foundation, and only one of them can grow. That's the unbreakable mind. Not a system that can't be reached, a system that can be reached fully and still hold. The cage and the fortress look identical from the outside. Only one of them has a door.